Good evening, everyone. As the rabbi just said, I'm Dick Fox. I am the chairman of the Jewish Policy Center. Let me just take a few minutes and tell you about the Jewish Policy Center. We are a 501c3 organization. We are not a political organization. We are an educational organization. And our work is to inform, to raise the issues that confront the Jews, America, Jews of the world, and do it in a collegial and wonderful way that provides you with information, hopefully questions, and enables all of us to leave understanding better with some of the problems that we're confronted. Excuse me. We also have with us, before I start, two wonderful people who are members of this community who are running for political office, and I'm not representing anything about them except to welcome them. One is Teresa Furman, who's running for district attorney in Montgomery County. Teresa. And District Attorney Bruce Castor, who is running for Montgomery County. Bruce, welcome, Bruce. Tonight we're going to talk about a topic which I know every one of you, if you have been reading the newspapers and listening to the television, has to be concerned about. It is the problem of radicalism and the new anti-Semitism on American college campuses. One of our participants tonight wrote a book called The Unholy Alliance, which is the coming together on college campuses of the radical Muslims and the far left who are promoting anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, the topic has been getting a lot of press lately. Recently, a new book, a dangerous book called The Israel Lobby, written by Professors John Mearsheimer and Stephen Wall, was published, and they have been getting a lot of press in their claim that the real problem in the world and in the United States is the Israel Lobby. We Jews who represent a fraction of the population are controlling America. These two professors are not the first to teach anti-Semitism, and they won't be the last. Academics across the country are whitewashing the problem of radical Islam, blaming Israel and America for the rise of Muslim violence. Historians are trying to rewrite history, claiming that Israel and America intend to dominate the globe with evil intentions. Meanwhile, Saudi oil money is funding Muslim student groups on every college campus in America, and they are methodically making contributions and buying up academic chairs, funding so-called Middle East studies groups, usually headed by radical Muslims. We're here tonight to hear about a serious attack on America, and to try and understand what each of us can do about it, because we still can and should be able to act in this country and present a picture to those that represent us and those that write the articles in our newspapers that points out the truth and the facts of what history and what the reality is today. The Jewish Policy Center has assembled the impressive panel that you're going to hear from tonight. I want to thank the Rabbi and Temple Beth Hillel for hosting this wonderful event in this beautiful sanctuary. It's a real pleasure to be here. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Mr. Michael Medved. Michael, as I know many of you know, is the son of Philadelphia. He was born in Philadelphia and raised here. He is a nationally syndicated radio host, best-selling author, and a veteran film critic. His daily 3-hour broadcasts reach more than 2.5 million listeners on nearly 200 stations across this country, drawing on an audience that consistently ranks his show as one of the top 10 political talk shows in the United States. I'm proud to say that he is also a distinguished fellow in the Jewish Policy Center. Michael will introduce the rest of the panel this evening. and as he has done many times before, act as our moderator and the provocative instigator of the questions and hopefully elicitor of wonderful answers. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to welcome Michael Medved.
Thank you very much, and it's wonderful to be here, especially under these circumstances with the Phillies closing on. And by the way, I appreciate the fact that people are here tonight and giving up in this holy season, holy kadosh, not only in Jewish terms but in baseball terms. To give that up, and only for that you should be inscribed for a sweet year and a successful playoff season. All right, just one quick word about the ground rules here. Dick was kind enough to talk about provocative questions. Most of those provocative questions are going to be provided by you, because we have done a very careful study at Jewish Policy Center of Jewish audiences. And there's one thing that's noticeable. Members of Jewish audiences tend not to be shy. And part of our purpose in Jewish Policy Center is not propaganda, it's not one side or another. It is to stimulate serious questions, serious discussion, and open debate. And in that spirit, I'm going to ask each of our panelists 2 rounds of questions for each of the 3 of them, so a total of 6 questions. And then it'll be your turn, and I'm expecting that people here will not filibuster. We don't want to have a repeat of what happened at University of Florida with John Kerry. I don't think anyone here is armed with tasers, if people know what I'm talking about. No, don't filibuster, but you'll have a chance at your questions. All right, without further ado, so we can make as much time as possible, let me welcome our very distinguished panel, all of whom happen to be friends of mine, all of whom have been guests on my radio show at one time or another. Daniel Pipes, as a matter of fact, was on my radio show this afternoon. First of all, let me welcome Cliff May. Cliff, you probably know, is the president of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. And you haven't done a clever acronym for Foundation of Defense of Democracies. It's just FOD. Right. FDD. Okay, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies is one of the leading think tanks, one of the leading organizations to talk about the importance of defending this republic, the nation of Israel, and democracies everywhere against the onslaught of Islamo-Nazi radicalism. Cliff has been a long-time journalist. He was the editor of one of the most important newspapers in the West, the Rocky Mountain News. And Cliff is also someone who is a regular guest on virtually all TV talk shows and fora. Cliff May, come on up. And I should also say, Cliff is involved right now. One of the major projects of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies is providing educational preparation for 600 professors, count them, on how to counteract the terrorist threat. Daniel Pipes needs no introduction in Philadelphia. He doesn't have the virtue of having been born and raised here, but as I was. But Daniel is a Philadelphian by choice, and that's fair enough, isn't it? And a Philadelphian by choice, recognized by all branches of Judaism. Daniel is the author of 18 books, which really isn't fair. I mean, that's absurd for almost anybody except for David Horowitz, but we'll get to that. And Daniel has also been someone who has lectured around the world. His Middle East Forum is an invaluable resource for monitoring what is going on in today's Middle East, what is going on in the struggle for democracy. He has been an important voice in Washington, D.C., and in campuses across the country, including for some years at the University of Pennsylvania, Daniel Pipes. And I should also say, because this doesn't go away, and this was part of the way that I introduced Daniel on my radio show this afternoon, he was one of the very few experts anywhere who tried to rouse this nation to the dangers of Islamic terrorism before September 11th, 2001. And for that, he deserves all of our thanks and recognition. And I first became aware of David Horowitz many years ago when both he and I happened to live in another part of the country in a town that is affectionately referred to as Berkeley. And at the time, David was one of the distinguished radicals in Berkeley as a leading voice of Ramparts magazine. And David's politics has changed, but his energy, brilliance, and creativity have not. Basically, if you see something going on that is controversial, but that passionately works to defend the ideals of the United States of America, probably David is involved in it somehow. You probably are familiar with his Front Page magazine, which is a huge internet resource. The David Horowitz Freedom Center provides information, experts, rallies. Coming up October 22nd, that week, they are sponsoring in campuses across the United States Islamic Fascism Awareness Week, which you might imagine is a bit controversial in some campuses. But David has never shied away from controversy. He is the author of a new book just about every month. Perhaps the best known and most significant of them is his own story, which is memorably retold in a fine book called Radical Son. Unholy Alliance explores the strange alliance of the very extreme left and of Islamic radicals who really don't seem to be left-wing in any sense, except their common hatred of the United States of America. David Horowitz. All right, let me begin. All of our panelists are known to be shy, soft-spoken, tough to draw them out of their shells. But let me begin with David, because I want to ask a series of questions that will raise some of the objections that you will commonly hear to even terms like Islamofascism. One of the things that happened to me as a radio host, I got a lengthy email from an Islamic defense organization on the West Coast when they heard about this program that we were doing here in Philadelphia tonight, and they were very critical of me and very critical of the whole program. The question was, David, the Jews of all people should be particularly sensitive to religious prejudice. Doesn't the mere terminology Islamic radicalism, terms like Islamo-Nazism, which is the term I prefer, or Islamofascism, which is commonly used, don't these terms imply and involve a slander of a decent and honorable faith, the overwhelming majority of whose adherents, certainly in the United States, and certainly around the world, are peaceful, decent, hardworking people who want to raise their families? In other words, isn't this the kind of alarmism the kind of negative characterization to which Jews themselves have been subjected to our enormous detriment for thousands of years?
Well, last time I looked, Mohammed Atta was carrying the Quran when he flew into the World Trade Center. And
David, you're going to have to get close to the microphone.
I say, these Islamic terrorists carry the Quran when they fly into tall buildings and scream Allahu Akbar as they fly into them. A religious war has been declared against America and the West and the Jews and Christians and homosexuals and women by imams who are the religious leaders of a wing of Islam. Islam itself has a history of conquest. It's obviously a very different religion from Christianity, for example, which worships a carpenter who preached peace. My colleague, Robert Spencer, has a new book out called Religion of Peace, Why Christianity Is and Islam Isn't, which is very instructive. Of course, there are plenty of Muslims who are peace-minded. There's an estimated 1.5 billion Muslims. According to the most conservative poll, 10% of them think that Osama bin Laden is a hero. According to Al Jazeera, it's 50%. So that's between 150 and 750 Muslims who want to kill us. There were probably lots of good Germans in Germany, but they didn't make a damn's worth of difference. When I see the Muslim Students Association or the Islamic Society of North America or CARE get on TV and denounce Ahmadinejad and all the Jew haters of the Islamic faith, I'll be impressed that there actually is a force in Islam that would oppose the extermination of the Jews. And unfortunately, Jews are highly sensitive. Well, it's not unfortunate. It's good that they're sensitive to the persecutions of other people. They need to get a lot more sensitive to the persecution of themselves.
All right, quick follow-up question. Quick follow-up question. You mentioned Robert Spencer in his new book, and Robert Spencer was a guest on my radio show for that book. He's been a guest on my show a half dozen times. His book is called Religion of Peace, ? Why Christianity Is and Islam Isn't. Is it not true, David, that infinitely more Jews have been slaughtered over the years by devout Christians than by devout Muslims, and yet we live at peace now with Christian communities just about everywhere? Why is it not possible for us to achieve the same kind of neighborly understanding with our Islamic neighbors?
Always the spotlight is in the wrong direction. Sure, it's true that a lot of Jews were murdered by Christians, but not in the last century. Of course, the Holocaust was carried out by pagans. It's interesting for those of you who have read Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great, how evasive it gets around the Nazi Holocaust. And it was Stalin, another atheist, who set out to follow Hitler's example and eliminate the Jews until his extremely timely demise. It's the same argument. If there were religious wars in the name of Christianity, we haven't had them for quite a long time. Islam has declared Islam. Islamists have declared war on the West. Osama bin Laden, the fatwas, it's World War III. It will only end when the infidels are defeated and an Islamic empire is established across the globe. So I'm looking at the aggressors, and as a Jew, I'm always happy when things aren't worse than they are. But I'm looking at what's in front of me, and what's in front of me is Islamic terrorists and their left-wing allies, the entire international, not the entire international secular left, but almost all of it, except for some marginal elements. Just like I know most of the Muslims who have stood up to the Islamic terrorists, I know most of the leftists. I can name most of the leftists who stood up to the left. But here you have a formidable alliance between communism and Islamicism. And the targets are Americans in the first place, the great Satan, and Israel in the second place, the little Satan. That's what I'm going to focus on, and I'll worry about any Christians who want to do me harm later. And let me just say one more thing, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. The greatest defenders of Israel in the United States are evangelical Christians, and Jews should never forget that.
All right, Daniel Pipes, you certainly know the American campus environment as well as anyone. I mentioned before that I had received an angry denunciation of this event before it even happened from someone with a so-called Muslim defense organization, and he made the point that, look, if you're talking about college campuses, those campuses are permeated, particularly the elite campuses, by Jewish students and Jewish faculty. University of Pennsylvania has one of the highest percentages of Jewish students. Penn, my father's alma mater, has one of the highest percentages of Jewish students of any major university in the country, comparable to Brandeis University, as a matter of fact. And the faculty at Penn would be very wildly disproportionately Jewish. I don't know if anyone's bothered to count a percentage of Jewish faculty at the elite universities, but I guarantee you it's much more than 2.1%, which is our percentage of the population. Given the very prominent Jewish percentage on campuses, given the tremendous funding that goes to support Jewish organizations on campuses, whether it's Hillel, there's Chabad that is serving campuses all across the United States, Zionist youth organizations. My brother was once involved with was president of the American Zionist Youth Foundation. How can you worry when the number of Muslim students is tiny and the number of radical Muslim students is even tinier? Isn't this simply a matter of trying to stifle any dissent at all from the militant Zionist worldview, which you are secretly trying to enforce? Yes or no?
2 points. First, the religion of an individual is less important in politics than the political outlook. Judaism, as you may be aware, is not a political ideology. There are Jews, as you're probably aware, who are not Republicans.
No.
One of my favorite illustrations of this was a review by one Mark Rubin, an acolyte of Edward Said, in The Nation, in which he eviscerated a book by one Fuad Ajami called, I can't remember the title of the book, but the point is that Fuad Ajami is a Shiite Muslim from Lebanon, and Mark Rubin is an American Jew. But Mark Rubin is on the left, and Fuad Ajami is in effect on the right. And Mark Rubin is anti-Israel, and Fuad Ajami is pro-Israel. The book was about Israel, basically. It doesn't matter what your religion is. There are plenty of evangelicals, as we just heard, who are pro-Israel. Indeed, I've dubbed American evangelicals Israel's second strategic resource after the IDF. And there are plenty of Jews who are anti-Israel. Plenty. To give just one illustration, the divestment movement that began some 5 years ago to get university endowments to flush out any investments that are in Israel was started by Jews. Some of the most notorious anti-Zionists on the American campus, such as Noam Chomsky, Norman Finkelstein, and many lesser lights, are Jewish. So this is not about religion. And indeed, if one assumes that Jews are pro-Israel, one then does two things. One ignores the evangelicals and others who are fervently pro-Israel, dismisses them, doesn't give them their proper due place and acknowledged importance. And secondly, and perhaps even more perversely, one gives those Jews who are anti-Israel a special status. Invariably, their conversations begin, "I am Jewish, but," and then they go on to criticize Israel unfairly. So let's keep separate religion from politics. The universities are left-wing institutions with a handful of exceptions, and those who succeed to become faculty at those universities, in general, especially in the social sciences, tend to be on the left. Their religion doesn't really matter. Second point would be about the Islamists, the Muslims who are supporters of radical Islam, or what David calls Islamofascism, and Michael calls Islamo-Nazi fascism. But I prefer just to call radical Islam or Islamism. These are indeed a small proportion of the population. They're not that small. If there are 6 million Jews, there are 3 million Muslims, so it's not that different. It's a new population. Much of it has come since 1965. In 1965, there were about 150,000 Muslims. It's a new population, young population, not established. But it is a dynamic population with, especially the Islamist component, a drive towards an ideological goal. And as we have seen with prior totalitarian movements, it doesn't take a lot of people. The fascists wreaked havoc, and the communists did enormous damage without ever getting a majority of the populations to support them. But their cadres, dedicated, intelligent, organized, funded, strategic, visionary, they got a lot done. So it is with the Islamists, whether it be in Uzbekistan or Pakistan or Egypt or the United States. We're seeing the force of their political mission. Day by day it grows. In Western Europe, where it's more advanced and the numbers are larger, here Muslims are just 1% of the population. In Western Europe, it's more like 5%. You can see they are dominating the social and political agenda of Europe today. It doesn't take 51%. 5% is enough. If I might conclude on just a brief response to the question you asked of David about Christians and Muslims and Jews throughout history. It is striking to note that through 14 centuries of Islamic history, all but the very last few decades have found Jewish populations preferring to live in Muslim countries than in Christian countries. From the 630s to the 1930s, you see a repeated pattern of Jews fleeing Christendom for Islamdom over and over again. As recently as the 1930s, when German Jews fled Germany for Turkey. 1945 marks a decisive turning point on both sides. Christian attitudes towards Jews and Muslim attitudes towards Jews. And you see a switch. But the striking thing is how very recent that is. That's just 60 years ago. For 1,300 years, it was the other way. And Jewish life in Muslim countries through all those centuries was overall better than Jewish life in the Christian world in terms of being integrated, in terms of being understood. Jewish and Islamic religions are much more similar. In terms of fewer pogroms, much less a Holocaust. In terms of, say, Jewish figures being part of Muslim life, if you compare, say, Maimonides with Rashi, couldn't be more different. Rashi excluded from French life, Maimonides being a physician to the king. So the situation we're in now is a new one, historically speaking, and it could well be a temporary one. It is very much a reality today. Christianity is not, or Christians are not the threat to Jews and Muslims are, but it was only in this last century that changed. And what's important to note is that things could change again.
All right, the question for Cliff May. The topic that was announced for tonight has to do with the threats of jihad and of what is called the new anti-Semitism on campus. Two-part question, Cliff May. First of all, what's new about it? And secondly, when people talk about anti-Semitism on campus, don't they really mean anti-Zionism? And as a matter of fact, if you read the enlightened words of the great sages Walt and Mersheimer, the authors of the Israel Lobby. By the way, you want to talk about something unbelievable? They got a $750,000 book advance from Farrar, Straus, and Giroux for that book, for the Israel Lobby book. And one of the charges they make in that very prominent book, these two professors, is that one of the tools used by the Israel Lobby to shut off dissent, to stop anyone from criticizing Israel at all, is calling anyone who dares to criticize Israel's excessively brutal policies or its imperialism or its nationalism or its injustices, anyone who criticizes Israel is immediately labeled an anti-Semite. Cliff May, aren't we guilty of that here tonight by labeling anti-Zionism on campus, which may exist, as anti-Semitism, which, it would be claimed, emphatically does not exist?
The simple answer is I don't think so, and the reason I don't think so is the following. Anti-Israelism has become the new anti-Semitism. You have to understand that the project of 20th century anti-Semitism was a Europe that would be free of Jews, Judenrein. The project of 21st century anti-Semitism is a Middle East that is free of Jews, Judenrein. The project of cleansing Europe of Jews has been substantially successful. There are still Jewish communities, but nothing like there were before the Holocaust, nothing like there were before World War II, before the Nazis took anti-Semitism to its logical conclusion. And today the anti-Semites say we have most of the Jews in the Middle East in one place. We have flushed them, ethnically cleansed them from Alexandria and from Tripoli and from Yemen and from other parts of the Middle East. Now we need to destroy them there. Zionism was the idea that there should be a Jewish state in the ancient Jewish homeland. And the Israelis are among the few peoples in the world who can say, we live in the same place, we practice the same religion, we speak the same language as did our ancestors 3,000 years ago. The idea that this one place must be destroyed, this is more than just anti-Zionism, because Zionism is the idea that there should be an Israel, now there is an Israel. Anti-Zionism, what does it mean now? It means the elimination of Israel, and there's no way to eliminate Israel without another Holocaust. And when Ahmadinejad says he wants to wipe Israel off the map, he doesn't mean they're all going to move to Berkeley and Brooklyn and Philadelphia. And we know that he doesn't mean that. So that the new anti-Semitism is expressed as anti-Israelism. Very important for us to understand that, and anti-Zionism is part of that. And if I may just take one more second, if I may, to highlight some of things that my colleagues here said, because I agree with them. Very important to understand that in 1917, it is doubtful that most Russians were communists. But the communists were determined and ruthless, and they prevailed. And in 1933, I doubt most Germans were Nazis, but the Nazis were ruthless and determined, and they prevailed. And today, I do not think that most Muslims are Islamofascists, Islamo-Nazis, militant Islamists, but the militant Islamists are determined and ruthless, and they mean to prevail. Now, it's important to understand that most of the victims of Islamo-fascism or militant Islamism are not Jews, are not Christians, they are Muslims. A friend of mine, Zachariah Fella, comes from Algeria. His father, who was an ambassador, was assassinated because he was a Muslim, but he lived a secular life, and he was opposed to the Islamists, and they murdered him. And Zachariah points out to audiences like this, 150,000 of my fellow Algerians have been murdered by the Islamists. What other nationality can say this? And how come people in the world don't understand this and don't know this? So that militant Islamism, which rises up from within the Islamic community, is a danger to Jews, to Christians, but perhaps most of all to Muslims. Very important to understand.
All right, follow-up question. Follow-up question to Cliff May. The esteemed president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, is coming to enlighten us all with a speech at the United Nations next week. And it's reported, in fact, that he is going to be receiving a tour of Ground Zero, accompanied by the New York Police Commissioner, Raymond Kelly. And this has become a hot issue today. I don't know if it's been resolved as yet. But President Ahmadinejad makes a very consistent point, if only we will listen. He suggests that the Jewish community in Tehran and throughout Iran is flourishing. There are an estimated 50,000 Jews, perhaps more, who live very secure, free lives in Iran. There is a Jewish member of parliament. And he makes clear, you're claiming that somehow the Muslims want a Middle East that is Judenrein. Yasser Arafat made clear that we love Jews. We've always loved Jews. We want Jews to continue there. We just don't approve of a Zionist entity. Second aspect of this question, to respond to the assertion by Ahmadinejad and others that we have nothing against Jews. Jews have always been in the Middle East. What we are opposed to is Zionists. And what about those people who may be bitterly critical of Israel and yet are deeply friendly to Jewish people? I'm thinking of someone who was actually co-officiating at Yom Kippur services Friday night and Saturday in Berkeley, California. This is not a joke. Cindy Sheehan, who has said that Israel is the most dictatorial and genocidal regime in history. In history, Cindy Sheehan is co-officiating with Rabbi Michael Lerner at, this is not a joke. You'll be much better off here at Beth Hillel, trust me. She's co-officiating at services of Tshuva that are being led for Yom Kippur by Rabbi Lerner. Isn't it possible for someone to be bitterly critical of Israel and at the same time, as Cindy Sheehan insists she is, a great lover of the Jewish people?
I think Rabbi Lerner will have a lot to repent for on Yom Kippur. In 1979, I was a young foreign correspondent, and I went to Iran to cover the return of Ayatollah Khomeini. It was a remarkable experience. One of the things I got to do was to visit with the leaders of the Jewish community, who had Khomeini's portrait up in their offices. Very carefully, they let me know this was not a matter of choice. The militant Islamists have been very clear. Those Jews who are not destroyed can live among them clearly as dhimmi, as second-class citizens, as they are, for example, in Iran, where according to and again, I don't know if we have good numbers, there were probably 100,000 Jews in Iran in 1979. We're probably down to about 20,000 now. Is that you agree with that number? Again, these are estimates. Some have fled, some have been jailed, some have been imprisoned and killed, some have been tortured. It is not a good place to be. Understand that the militant Islamist view, very clearly, is that any land ever conquered by Muslims is an endowment from Allah, and it must be always forever thereafter ruled by Muslims, and that is why Israel cannot exist, because Jews rule it. Yes, Jews who surrender may be allowed to live, and they may be allowed to live as dhimmi. And being a dhimmi can be as anodyne as it was in Turkey, where they pay a special tax and they understand their place, or as awful as it was in places like Yemen, where they must get off the sidewalk and walk into the street if a Muslim approaches. So Cindy Sheehan, I'm afraid, is, I don't know, a person of deep ignorance, and Michael Lerner of very flawed judgment. And Ahmadinejad should not be shown around the site of 9/11 by any American. The only thing we can, if the UN had any integrity, it would not invite him to come, since he has threatened the genocide of a nation, a member of the United Nations. And the only thing I can say is that him coming to New York should be an opportunity to educate the American public about Ahmadinejad, those he represents, and the terrible ideology that he represents. Final point gets back to what David was saying and what Daniel was saying. This is why Islamism is a fascistic, Nazi, totalitarian ideology. The ideology of Nazism was the Germans, that Aryans must rule the world. The ideology of communism was that the proletariat must rule the world. The ideology of Islamism is that Muslims must rule the world. This is exactly analogous. And until we understand this threat, we will never respond adequately towards it. Thank you.
One very quick additional word on that, if I may. One proof, and it's a powerful proof, that the intention of Islamists really is a Middle East that is Judenrein, that is pure of Jews, cleared of Jews, is what happened with the tragedy of what is called disengagement, when 7,000 Jewish settlers were not allowed to continue their lives among 1.3 million inhabitants of Gaza. They had to be forcibly removed. The Gazans couldn't tolerate one Jew. Not only that, they couldn't tolerate the greenhouses that were purchased for them by American Jewish charitable money at a cost of $19 million, but they had been contaminated, those greenhouses, by contact with Jewish cooties, and therefore had to be burnt to the ground, even when they could have been used to help starving Gazans to produce some food. So let us keep that in mind in terms of the true eagerness of Islamist fanatics to welcome Jews in their midst, even as dhimmi, even as second-class citizens. David Horowitz, another challenge, and this very much regards the specific topic before us tonight, talking about the new anti-Semitism on campus. Do we not run a real danger of crying wolf? Everyone will agree that Europe has a big anti-Semitism problem. Actually two of the leading teachers' unions in Britain were trying to impose a boycott, basically, on Israeli academics. There have been terrible incidents involving violence and intimidation against Jewish and Israeli spokespeople in Europe. Clearly, it is not safe in France, which is the biggest Jewish community in Europe, for people to walk home from services on high holy days, on Shabbat, at any time. But that emphatically is not the case in the United States. Isn't your entire operation, whether it's fighting for the so-called Academic Bill of Rights, whether it's Islamo-Fascist Awareness Week on campuses across the country, isn't it simply propaganda by other means and needlessly scaring people about an anti-Semitic threat that simply isn't real to students on campuses today in the United States?
I'm sure, Michael, that somebody in Germany in 1937 was saying the same thing. I believe that we are in a much worse state in the world today, that is, we as Jews, than the Jews were in the 1930s. Yes, there's a battle going on in this country. This is why I've organized. This will be the largest conservative student organization. Actually, we'll have a non-conservatives as well, but the largest student demonstration to protest the enemies of Israel and of the United States in the history of this country. It's a matter of will. The lies are so monstrous these days. I mean, the Walt Mearsheimer book, the media is controlled by the Jews who are using it to attack Muslims. Name me the Hollywood film that has identified our enemies as Islamo-fascists. Name me the Hollywood film that is defending the state of Israel. If you want to see where we are, just imagine Jews were blacks, persecuted for thousands of years, murdered en masse, kept in concentration camps after the war for 2 years because no country would take them, who established a little foothold that they had been promised, not from Arab land, but from the land of the Ottoman Turks. This was the Ottoman Empire from 1552 to 1922, but just about that. Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, all created by the imperialists. And the Palestine Mandate, which was promised to the Jews, divided up so that 95% of it went to Arabs anyway, and the 5% that the Jews got of the Palestine Mandate, 60% of that was an arid desert. And then you had a global movement to destroy that one state and to identify a Jewish or the Black Liberation Movement as racist. Imagine where all these so-called liberals, who are totally unworthy of the name, would be on an issue like that. It wouldn't be an argument. It's only because it's the Jews and because the Jews have been more creative and productive. Because you have to understand, Islam, first of all, Islam is a politics first. It's unlike Christianity and Judaism, which are religions in which Christianity has severed the political dimension, and Judaism as well, long, long ago. Islam is about politics. It's about establishing a caliphate. It's about establishing territory and never, ever giving it up and not letting anybody convert out of Islam. This is a totalitarian political system, and it has drawn tremendously, first from the Nazis. Al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, an admirer of Hitler. Al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, and the spiritual godfather of all Palestinian nationalism, a Nazi who went to Berlin, who attempted to build an extermination camp in the Middle East to exterminate the Jews. This is what this movement comes out of, and then integrating with the whole communist movement and their analysis. You read Osama bin Laden's fatwas, they sound like they were written by Michael Moore, but they lift from Michael Moore. The so-called class analysis and everything has been integrated. This is what we are facing. This is the reality. And in this country, there are some people who understand this and will stand up, and there are people, I guess it was Mayor Bloomberg, who would arrange to have Hitler himself visit the site where he was jumping up and down for joy when all those people were exterminated. You call it the Stockholm Syndrome. Appeasement is a very basic, and denial, very basic human psychological responses. It's up to people like the people in this room and the rest of us to stand up and to start organizing and call these Nazis what they are and fight them.
David, I'm intrigued by your comparison of the videos that Osama bin Laden has been releasing so prolifically recently with the video work of Michael Moore. Generally, the bin Laden material has higher production values. Daniel Pipes, and then we'll have the one more question for Scott May, and then we'll open it up to your questions, so get ready. Did I say Scott May? Cliff May. I explained this. I had a friend in college named Scott May, and it's almost an irresistible.
Really?
My Uncle
I
Scott.
know Cliff May for years. So, okay, Daniel, one of the questions that someone might ask, isn't the greatest need for Israel to understand why some of the brightest and most favored young people in the Palestinian communities want to blow themselves up to kill Israelis? Isn't the greatest need that we have right now for peace, particularly at this time of year, to reach out, to understand, to build bridges, to negotiate, and once and for all to implement a final negotiated solution to the Israeli-Palestinian and the American versus Islamist struggles?
Great question, Michael. It reminds me that back in 1992, then Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, said over and over again, you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. Which is, I think, a good summary of the point you just made. You reach out to your enemies, you give them things, you negotiate, you compromise. I think it's profoundly wrong. And the error is as follows. You don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your former enemies. You can't make peace with enemies. You can't make peace with Ahmadinejad today. Couldn't make peace with Saddam Hussein 5 years ago. You couldn't make peace with the Nazis and so forth. You don't make peace with enemies. You first have to defeat your enemies. Little detail. We're in a war, not a war of our choosing. War was declared on us by the Islamists. Israel's in a war, not of its choosing. It's got a war in its hand for 60 years. We, for, I would say, 30 years, since the late 1970s, we've had a war that's been increasing in momentum. Now, when you have a war, there are two ways the war might come out. Win it, or you lose it. There's no compromise in war, in general. Very few instances when a compromise solution works out. I recall two recent episodes. The Paris peace talks that did not end the Vietnam War, and the Oslo peace negotiations that did not end the Arab-Israeli conflict. In fact, one could argue in both cases that it was a kind of self-disarmament that we engaged in, self-delusion. Wars are not ended by clever schemes drawn up by clever people. They're won either on the battlefield or these days, more likely, on the political battlefield of opinion. It is not these days a matter of bullets, a matter of ships and planes and tanks. It's not a matter of who will prevail in the military battlefield. It is rather a matter of who will prevail in the political battlefield. The debate in this country, as throughout the West, as indeed throughout the world, is between those who would appease, those who will give things in order to be left alone, and those who want to win. Those who seek resolution, and those who seek victory. Now, this interesting thing is that the word victory, basic, simple English word, has virtually disappeared from our dictionary, from our discourse. We don't speak about victory. And for that matter, the Israelis don't speak about victory. There is not a single active leading politician in Israel who speaks about defeating the enemies of Israel. They're all talking about reaching some kind of resolution or other. It doesn't work. The historical record shows that if you reach some kind of resolution, you've simply postponed the ending of the war. Give you one or a couple of examples. World War I seemed to end with a victory by the United States and its allies. But it wasn't really a victory because the Germans didn't really give up. They really didn't think they'd lost. They thought they'd been stabbed in the back. Their cities were standing. Their armies were still in force. And so they wanted to try again. The next time around, we did defeat them in such a way they got the message it was over. We lost in 1975. We lost in a way that no one ever tried to resurrect the idea of going back to Vietnam. The Arabs lost many times, many wars to Israel, but they didn't give up. It is ultimately a matter of giving up. Our goal in war and those of our allies, must be to get our enemies to give up. It's not enough to beat them on the battlefield. They must give up. They must give up the goal of achieving their war aims. In the case of Israel, it is the aim of eliminating Israel. I somewhat disagree with Cliff, and I don't think the only way of eliminating Israel is by bombing it. It can be demographically, it can be economically, it can be other ways. It can be a more subtle form of snuffing it out. But the end goal is no more Zionism, no more Jewish sovereignty. One way or another, it has to be reached. The Israeli goal is to win the acceptance of its enemies. In other words, that they stop trying to eliminate Israel. In our own case, we have a self-appointed enemy that is seeking to transform who we are. Again, it's not necessarily a physical defeat of us. They don't have the means to do that. But it is a political one. And to encapsulate it in a single sentence, it would be to replace the Constitution with the Sharia, Islamic law. Now, either we accept that or we fight it. Either we are defeated by it or we win. Those, ladies and gentlemen, are the basic choices. There is the notion that you can reach out and make friends with your enemy and appease him and he'll go away is unfortunately a failed notion. We must not appease, we must win. Thank you.
By the way, before I go to our final question, very pertinent to what Daniel was just saying, I just found out tonight about a project that is being launched right here in Philadelphia, but for across the country and around the world, called the Victory Project, which is meant to be a clearinghouse for people who want to contribute to Western victory. And it's available. It's at Victory Project. It's much needed. victoryproject.org. Let us go to Cliff May for the final question. Cliff, we all remember, I think, when we were in college, when we were on campus. I have two daughters at university right now, son who's a sophomore in high school. I have one daughter who doesn't have to worry too much about Islamic radicalism on her campus because she's at Yeshiva University at Stern College, and they don't. By the way, anyone who's even considering Stern, it's been outstanding. Sarah's a senior. Really an outstanding experience for her. And okay, that was a little unsolicited plug. My other daughter, however, does encounter, at the University of Washington, encounters all kinds of Islamic radicalism. And one thing that I think we can all remember from our own years as undergraduates, it's a typical story that even committed Jewish homes send their kids out to college and university. David, you know that at Berkeley, where you were for so many years, this was a typical story. Parents would send their kids off from good Jewish homes off to Berkeley, and they come back as Hindu monks, or they come back worse as little Stalinists, which was very, very common. They come back very weird and rejecting everything. The questions, Cliff, for you is, isn't the presence of some really poisonous Islamic, anti-American, anti-Israel radicals, doesn't that help encourage, in a certain way, some rediscovery of Jewish identity by some of our young people on campuses who suddenly find themselves embattled?
It probably does have that effect on some, but I think the domination, the virtual monopoly that is enjoyed on our campuses by the far left and the dominance right now enjoyed by apologists for Islamism in virtually all of the departments of Middle East studies around the country represents a real threat and a real difficulty for anybody trying even to speak up with another point of view. And don't forget, we have a situation on our campuses where contrary opinions are shouted down. Not just in this regard, but just the other day you had Larry Summers, who served in the Clinton administration, being told he couldn't speak at a graduation or a ceremony.
It was actually the regent.
Region of the regions, because his views on gender were outside the mainstream, and they didn't want to hear from him or have him on the campus. He'd been a former president of Harvard, as well as a member of the Clinton administration. Donald Kagan, an eminent classicist at Yale University. He was told that he would not be able to speak, and a former dean would not be able to speak. They didn't want to hear him. What you have now is a situation where those on the right and those who think we need to fight against militant Islamism are being shouted down, stifled, told they have no right even to speak up. Now, I do hope that you're right, Michael, and that a lot of our young people will respond by showing more resolve, more determination, cleverer and smarter answers, and forcing themselves into this debate and having it. But right now we're in a terrible situation on our campuses, which is sort of the basic discussion we're coming back to of this forum, because of what's happened. And we have the Saudis giving huge amounts of money to universities, $20 million, for example, to Harvard University. $20 million also to Georgetown University. These are not gifts, these are investments. Michael mentioned that my organization has trained more than 600 professors, but I can tell you they are not in Middle East studies departments right now. They are in political science or international law or international affairs. That's where you may still be able to get a foot in the door and have an honest conversation about terrorism and the radical ideologies and movements that utilizes and drives terrorism, but you pretty much can't do it in Middle East studies departments because they have been so taken over by the apologists for Islamism, have been for years. I should say as well, that what has happened too much in the Jewish philanthropic community is that Jews give money to universities and they get the Shapiro Center, and then the Saudis come in and decide who the professors will be. And this has been a terrible mistake that really needs to be looked at, and I would argue rectified over time. Those students who are educated in this Middle East studies departments are indoctrinated. They were learning before 9/11 that there is no problem from militant Islamism. There is no such thing, that Wahhabism is not something we should be afraid of. In fact, it doesn't exist in Saudi Arabia or anywhere else. And these students trained in these departments then go into the CIA, go into the State Department, go into the government. And let me tell you, they are prevalent in these parts of our government today as a result of this. And if you're trained in a Department of Jewish Studies, you will not be nearly so welcomed as an analyst or in the State Department or a Foreign Service officer. We have a situation on our campuses that we should have been addressing 25 years ago. We did not. It is dreadful at this point. We need to rectify it. It is probably going to take a generation if we fight very hard, and we have not started to fight very hard yet.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now at the stage of the program where you will have the opportunity to ask questions. And by the way, you can ask questions, address questions also to, please address them to one member of the panel. And if we can, panel, try to give quick answers so that other panelists can also give quick comments if they so choose. Some of these questions, if you wish, can also be addressed to me. Do we have a microphone available to hand to people? Oh, great. Turn it on. Is it on? No?
Come and bring it.
On now? No? Now it's on? All right. We can do this Jerry Springer style. Gentleman right here.
The presentation was a little bit militant, I think. The presentation was a bit militant, and I'm accustomed to that. I was very young. I made a speech, and Robert Gordis was in the audience, and my life I probably have been more military than militant, having served as a Okay. Having served as a officer in the Second World War, and probably the only one in the room that was an officer in the Israel Air Corps in the War of Independence. So I've been military. So let me ask a question. I would start with question definition for Dr. Pipes. I'm accustomed to notions of radical Islam. When I think of radical Islam, I think probably as you do. And many of the things you've been saying have a grain of truth in them about Zionism and anti-Semitism being connected and that sort of thing. But radical Islam means all the things you've been saying. Caliphate, jihad, Jaish al-Islami, all that sort of thing. And when I use those terms and carefully classify people in those terms, I only find among the billion or so Muslims in the world that these kinds of definitions fit. And then, so what I think you're doing is you're stereotyping. You're spreading these definitions over.
You're saying, in other words, guilt by association.
Let me finish.
No, please.
Yeah.
No speak, please. You got it.
I'm your host.
I think the question is, why am I distinguishing between Islam and radical Islam?
Let me finish this.
I think it's...
Dr. Pipes, let me finish.
Up to you,
I'm not going to be long-winded.
No. 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay. I can imagine somebody going into a mosque tonight and then saying, hey, you know, all those Jews are Kahanists. And they're building shrines to Baruch Goldstein and so on, then to spread it all over the Jews. That's a problem. So I really find myself answering yes to most of Mr. Medved's questions, rather than in your responses to them. That's the question. That's the question. So the question is definition and how far you can spread it.
Okay.
And
the definition of radical Islam?
I know what radical Islam. I'm asking how far you're going to spread it over the Muslim community. And then, all right? Okay.
Why do I talk about radical Islam? Isn't it all just Islam? Let me note for you who were looking at politics and such issues in the 60s and 70s, do you remember any mention of Islam? Do you remember anything about jihad or dhimmis, honor killings, caliphate? No. There was, in effect, no radical Islam at that point. It's a modern movement dating back to the 1920s, not coincidentally to the decade when fascism and communism appeared to be most have the greatest potential as the future way of ordering, in other words, having totalitarian methods order life. And the origins of Islamism or radical Islam go back to then. And it brewed for 50 years, and it came to power first in Iran in 1979, and it has been growing in power since then. But it is a 20th century movement responding to 20th century challenges. It draws on earlier thinkers and movements such as Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab in Saudi Arabia, Ibn Taymiyyah in Egypt and Syria, Khawarij early in the Islamic first century. But as a movement, it is a 20th century movement that is distinct. Now, as Cliff pointed out, the primary victims, the majority of victims of radical Islam have been Muslims. Not just in Algeria, which is an outstanding case, but even more dramatically in Darfur. One doesn't hear much, but the victims in Darfur are Muslim victims of Islamism. This is a major, major difference between Muslims. So our goal has to be to help those Muslims who are anti-radical Islam to form a response. There is no response at this time. Radical Islam is a cohesive, attractive, coherent, demanding, visionary approach. And on the other side, there's almost nothing. There are a few individuals with their own theories. Our goal has to be to help those Muslims, to empower, to finance, to promote, to applaud those Muslims who are offering an alternative to the Islamist project. My signature phrase Radical Islam is the problem, and moderate Islam is the solution. A moderate Islam that in effect does not exist today, but we, along with the Muslims who don't like this order, can build for tomorrow.
All right. Yes, sir.
How can we convince the majority of the Jewish people, the ACLU and the New York Times liberals, that there is a danger? We here, we're part of the choir. We agree with you. The majority of our faith are alienated with the ACLU, Cindy Sheehan's, the Michael Moores, and the New York Times. How can we convince them of the danger that we face?
The only possibility for convincing some of them would be if somebody drops a bomb on their heads. The ACLU is a radical, anti-American, communist organization working hand in glove with the terrorists. Sammy Al-Arian.
Tell us what
Sammy Al-Arian is a terrorist who's been deported. He was a civil liberties activist when his brother was arrested and threatened with deportation for terrorist activities. He was a partner of the ACLU, which defended him beyond his exposure. You have to understand that the American left, which is what the ACLU is, and of course there's always individuals who are decent. One of them happens to be Nadine Strawson, who are actual civil libertarians, sort of actual civil libertarians. I don't want to give her too much. The ACLU has gotten 370 or 400 American cities to pass resolutions refusing to cooperate with Homeland Security, refusing to cooperate with the Patriot Act. The ACLU and the Center for Constitutional Rights, another communist organization, are at the forefront of the defenses of the terrorists in Guantanamo. This is just classic. The communist movement developed this 50 years ago. When I was a kid, my parents were communists. They had the Committee for the Protection of the Foreign-Born, because there were all these communist leaders who were immigrants and who were working to overthrow the government and help the Soviet Union win the Cold War. The government wanted to deport them, so suddenly all these Marxists became civil libertarians for this one issue. And there's no convincing the New York Times. The New York Times has worked to sabotage the war on terror since its beginning. It is conducting a psychological warfare campaign. It is colluded with traitors, people who leak classified information that destroy classified national security programs are traitors, and the New York Times actively and knowingly abetted them.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I do want to promise, and of course a promise during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, during the 10 days of repentance, very serious. We will be before 9 o'clock. Okay, so we're heading toward conclusion.
What's your call to action for all of us? What should we be doing to do something about this?
You need to, I would argue that you need to do a number of things. You need to obviously continue to educate yourselves, as I think you are this evening. You need to educate your friends and your neighbors. And if I may, I would say you need to support the kinds of organizations that we represent, because without your support, we can't work on these issues, and we are up against a very, very well-funded opposition, including the Saudis, including other radical Muslim interests, including organizations like CARE, including organizations, I'm afraid, like MoveOn.org, and others on the radical left who, as David has pointed out, have made common cause with apologists for Islamism and with Islamists themselves. All of these groups that are working, and there are not enough of these groups, I would say, right now, do need your active support.
Okay.
Wait, Michael, I just want to say, look, from October 22nd to 26th, that week, at Temple University, at Penn State University, at the University of Pennsylvania, there will be an Islamofascism Awareness Week to bring to tens of thousands of members of those university communities this message. The Jewish Policy Center will be involved. The Hillels at both these universities will be involved. Daniel will be involved, and the Middle East Forum. You can give these students support. Just contact them and ask them how. They need, obviously they need money. It's not large amounts of money, but they need security. They need to promote these things. Get involved with your local students on your local campuses who are going to are in the front lines, actually, of this battle. Thank you.
Okay, let's try to get as many questions in as we can. Young man, somebody who's here. Okay, I was going to have you do it because you're one of the people here who is of campus age, sort of. And lady next.
All right, everybody can hear me? Very close. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, so it's going in and out. All right, so while I certainly agree with everything you said, I also think that the United States should be dedicating resources to addressing the so-called, good the good political powers in the Middle East, such as Egypt and the other North African countries that are to show that they are promoting false Western values and that their citizenry are associating their oppression with Western values, and they're not getting a clear picture of what the United States really is all about: pluralism, democracy, promoting good values, equality. And so my question is, do you think that there should also be a simultaneous push, not just fighting radical Islamist groups, which I wholly believe in, but also showing that Mubarak in Egypt and Tunisia and Algeria are promoting false values and are giving Western so-called democracy a bad name?
I think you'll find a division of opinion among us on this. My view is that Islamism has two wings: the violent wing, which gets most of the attention, the terrorists and others, and the non-violent wing, the wing that works through the political system. And what we have found is that when we promote democracy and promote it rapidly and want it to happen quickly, whether it be in Iraq or Lebanon or the Palestinian areas or Egypt or Saudi Arabia or Morocco and so on, we find that it's the Islamists who are the best organized and who prevail. So yes to democracy, but not democracy now, democracy in a decade or two or three. Cliff.
I don't actually disagree with Daniel on this. I think people misunderstand what democracy is. Democracy is not about elections. If it were just about elections, then two wolves and a lamb having a vote on what to serve for dinner would be democracy. And it's not. Democracy means freedom of speech. It means freedom of religion. It means the rule of law. It means an independent judiciary. It means a free press. It means a lot of things before elections. When you rush to elections before you have the civil society underneath it, you get the kind of results that Daniel talks about. In terms of democracies in the Middle East, you have Israel. And you have, to a certain extent, Turkey, where Daniel and I were not too long ago together, although it's somewhat endangered there. But that's about it. And even the so-called moderate countries, such as Egypt, are less moderate when you look at them carefully. Jordan, we think of as a moderate country. How many of you know that Jordan does not allow you to hold citizenship if you are Jewish? Does not allow it. Saudi Arabia is sometimes called a moderate country. It is not by any stretch of the imagination. So there's a lot that's not understood by this administration, I'm afraid. When I advise this administration on democracy, I'm part of a panel, a committee that reports to Condi Rice, but I am critical of the approach to democratization, which doesn't understand the foundation that has to be laid in order to create this complex system.
Okay, gentlemen, gentlemen, let's try to we're going to get 4 more questions in. People, if you can bear with me, I know Jewish people have shpilkas, particularly this time of year. But if we can, we will, by 9 o'clock, it's less than 20 minutes. We'll try to get 4 more questions in if this battery holds up. And we had a student from Temple University. Okay.
Hi. Hello? Okay. This is for Cliff. I am a junior at Temple, and sometimes being pro-Israel is very hard. It's very hard to be pro-Israel on campus with the liberal sentiment, both within the faculty and within the students. And we were just voted the most diverse campus in this country. But that's really a joke because no one is actually diverse. The Jews keep to the Jews, the Asians keep to the Asians. But the only diverse club on campus is SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine. And I was wondering, in your opinion, I have my own opinion, but why this cause brings such diverse, why this cause? Why not Darfur? There's so many causes that bring such diverse people together. But it's this one cause that brings Jews into the club, which bring...
All right. You know what? Okay, can I make a suggestion formatically? Because, and really, please, people, if you can just bear with us, we will not keep you long. So Henry VIII said to his second wife, we will not keep you long, and we won't. So if why don't we do? This microphone is running out of battery, which is why it's intermittent. Trying to do, gentlemen, if it's okay, is we'll respond to that statement. We'll take 3 more statements, and then everybody gets to respond. If you can just take note.
The answer to the question. Oh, okay.
David, do you want to wait? Let's let people get their say, then everybody on the panel gets his say, okay?
I have spent my life fighting for Israel, as I'm sure many people in this room have, in every possible venue I can think of. Today we had what many people in the room were already familiar with, though not to the depth our experts brought to us, a picture that makes us wring our hands. Just joining or paying dues to organizations that you people represent is not sufficient for people like me who want to take a more active role. I'm as active as I can be, but tonight, other than that remark, which I just echoed, which is join our organizations, it's not enough. There should be more than walking out of here wringing our hands, because we now in depth know the seriousness of the problem, which we only grazed before.
Let's take just a few more comments from the audience, gentlemen, and then we'll take 2 more after that, and then comments from the panel.
I'll try to direct a question, a little more serious content. Okay. In Europe now, currently, there have been several attempts at terrorist attacks. Some have failed, some have been successful. There has been emerging in Europe, from what I see, particularly in the Netherlands, far right-wing groups who are raising up in an effort to control the flow of Muslims into the country and to expel them. Such activities would ultimately lead to a transfer of this particular type of activity from the Muslims to the Jews of Europe. If such terrorist activities here were successful in this country, and eventually something will happen, will be successful, it would seem likely that such an emergence of the right wing in this country could emerge, which again could be a repeat of Europe all over again. How realistic is that, and what can we do to stop it?
These are all excellent questions, and they'll give people an excellent opportunity to respond. Let's make this, if I may, the last question. And I think we'll be around to speak after the evening is formally concluded.
I have a question about that. Maybe I could just speak up. Oh, okay, can you hear me now? Okay. Loud, very good. The question I have is connected with what that lady was just talking about. In view of all the things you have said, and in view of the fact that within a year from now we'll be voting for political officers who will represent our views. Now, there's a large group of them, a lot of Republicans, a lot of Democrats. In view of what you think should be done, the way the United States should be presenting their view, who do you think among them? I'm not, obviously, it's not like an endorsement. Whoa.
No politics.
What I'm asking is the same thing as, like, you just said that Ahmadinejad is coming to New York. Well, obviously, he's no Giuliani who told Arafat where to go. So we need somebody who can actually stand up. Can you tell us, without necessarily pointing to somebody, some people who are going to be standing out there and representing the United States and our cause?
Okay. All right, we have a series of fascinating and explosive questions, and let me recall the fact that the Jewish Policy Center is a non-political, non-partisan organization, but that may not stop some of our panelists from answering a direct. Dick, should it stop our panelists from answering a direct question? No, don't answer it. All right. So who would like to? One very provocative question. The student at Temple was asking, and David, I think you were about to answer. What is it about the Palestinian cause, above all the other causes that are out there, whether it's Darfur, what is it about the Palestinian cause that is so attractive to so many radicals on campus?
Well, what she asked is about the diversity of the group. The diversity you're seeing is a diversity of the international left. Israel is just part of a hierarchy that the left is attacking. You go to any women's studies course, any peace studies course, any black studies course, any English lit course, not any English lit, but a lot of them, any cultural anthropology course, and you will be taught that America and Israel are racist, sexist, capitalist, homophobic, oppressive, imperialist powers. And what you see in Students for Justice for Palestine is just that communist left, students seduced by the... I was just at Temple. How many students in this room, and there were business majors and so forth, how many of you have read the Communist Manifesto? I've been required to read it in class. Everybody raises their hands. How many of you had to read it more than one time? Everybody once said I had to read it 4 times in class. How many of you have had to read Hayek or von Mises? 0. So the curriculum in our universities today is to teach students a Marxoid view of the world, in which there is an imperialist world system called it's called globalization, and they're all taught to be anti-globalization and the white supremacist oppressors. The fact that Temple University has an entire African American studies department run by a racist, which indoctrinates students in racist ideology called Afrocentrism, which is also an academic fraud. This is what they get for an education. So, of course, the Palestinians are an oppressed people. This is a people, 60% of whom support suicide bombing, all of whom support the obliteration of a Jewish state. As I say, imagine a country where everybody is supporting the obliteration of a black state. You would know just what to think of those people. This is a Nazi cause, and the fact that the left is supporting it, I mean, I've called this the unholy alliance, is easily predictable if you look at what the left has supported. The murder of 100 million people in peacetime in our lifetimes. The answer to the lady about what to do, you have Jewish students I talk to were physically threatened on the Temple campus. They need support. They're going to go out there and try to refute the lies which are building up a movement to destroy us. Help them. That's activism.
All right. Daniel Pipes, do you want to take a crack at one or several of those questions quickly? We have about 8 minutes left.
Take a crack at the Europe question. Yes, there is the real possibility that a neo-fascist or even fascist response to the growing assertive presence of Muslims will occur. It could be ugly. There could be violence. There could be expulsions. There could be violence. And you're right that it could turn against Jews as well, but I tend to think not. I think one of the interesting developments that's taking place in Europe is that the far-right European parties are the only ones that are talking about the serious issues that Europe faces. And as they do, they become electorally more ambitious, and they're focusing on immigration and Muslim-related issues, and they're losing interest in Jewish issues. I can't swear that that will continue. I don't know that it will continue, but it is certainly a process that's underway. And what one finds increasingly is that Jews in Europe are beginning to vote for the right-wing parties. On the question about presidential candidates, well, of course, I'm not going to answer. I would say that if you put my name in the search engine with those of certain leading Republican candidates, you'll see who I've affiliated with.
All right. By the way, I will answer that question, but in a way that won't get anybody into trouble. Cliff May.
Scott is a great nickname. I'll accept that. I'll make two just very quick points. If you look back through history, when there have been great threats that people have faced, one response has unfortunately been to say, what's a simple answer, and who can we blame? And if you can blame somebody who doesn't have actually a lot of power, somebody who thinks they're blaming me, therefore I must be at fault, that tends to be very convenient. Jews have often been those who have been blamed, and that's partly what you were seeing, a way not to face the real threat that's represented by militant Islamism, but instead to blame the Jews. And that gets me to the second point. I also will not answer directly the question of who to vote for, but I'll tell you how to approach the question. Any candidate you vote for president, or really any office, do they understand what's going on in the world, or do they not? Do they realize that in the 20th century, totalitarianism was a huge threat to us in its Nazi form, in its fascist form, in its communist form, in the form of Japanese militarism. And there was nothing inevitable about our defeating those terrible enemies of freedom, but we did prevail because we were determined to do so when we fought very hard. In the 21st century, totalitarianism takes the form of militant Islamism. It is as serious a threat as we have ever faced, perhaps more so. And if they don't understand that we have to stand up to it, if they don't have the courage of their convictions to stand up for what they believe in, then I would say don't vote for them.
All right. A very few concluding words. First of all, in terms of acknowledging the heroic accomplishments of the generation that won World War II, I want to thank our first questioner for helping to save the world in both the American and in the Israeli military. So thank you, sir. We salute your service. On this question of presidential candidates, let me be very clear about who not to vote for, okay? Because there is one candidate in each political party who has been drawing some significant Wahhabi money, and both of whom have trafficked with haters of Israel, and are basically pledged to the destruction of Israel as we know it. One of them, it will come as no surprise, is Dennis Kucinich. And Dennis Kucinich, running a campaign as a Democrat, is bitterly anti-Israel, is in favor of an American realignment to a more even-handed position in the Middle East, and we know what that means. Even worse is Ron Paul. Most people don't know this. Ron Paul has trafficked actively with neo-Nazis for years. He used to provide a regular column to Spotlight, which is a neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic rag. He, in the most recent Republican debate, he said in the debate that the Iraq war is not America's war, it's the neoconservatives' war. And I think we know what that means. When people use the term neoconservative, and he mentions neoconservatives, and he mentioned Richard Pearl, who was never, it's bad. And I think I can say without being partisan, that on both sides of politics, you have candidates who have not been friendly to Israel. You also have many candidates, thank God, on both political parties who have long records of very strong support for Israel. Chris Dodd of Connecticut is the son of one of the Nuremberg prosecutors, his father, Senator Tom Dodd, and he just wrote a book about it. Chris Dodd has been involved in pro-Israel and pro-Jewish philanthropical activities for a long time. So has, and I want a polite response, please, certainly, Senator Clinton. Senator Clinton has done a great deal to reach out to the Jewish community and to build Jewish support, and so has Senator Obama. Senator Obama recently took down off his website, they were running an ad on his website for the Walt Merksheimer book, and Senator Obama had it taken down within 5 hours. And that was a good thing for him to do, and I think we should welcome his support. On the Republican side, Mike Huckabee has led 6 different church tours to Israel. He knows a bit of Hebrew. He has a huge feeling for Israel. He says he loves Israel more than any other country next to America. And if you talk to him about it, Mitt Romney was just in Israel. He met, my brother made Aliyah 17 years ago. And Governor Romney met with my brother, has a long history of supporting Israeli business as a businessman. Rudy Giuliani, Rudy... I don't think I have to tell anybody here what Rudy did to defend the Jewish community in New York after a mayor who didn't do so much to defend the Jewish community in New York, and his deep and long-standing feelings of support for Israel, as one of our questioners asked very directly. Rudy, when he was mayor, blocked Arafat from polluting the Metropolitan Opera, let alone taking someone like Ahmadinejad to ground zero. Final question. One of the questions here was, what can we do? This is a great turnout. It's wonderful to have everybody here. Can I mention to you, Jews are very good at talking to each other and arguing with each other. One of the most important things we can do is to begin talking more than we do to people of other communities. It's so important to invite to organizations like this, to invite to gatherings like this, some of your Catholic and Lutheran and Episcopalian and atheist and secular friends, to invite people of every nationality and denomination. Because the future of Israel, the future of the United States, yes, Jews are important to it, but it's going to be determined by a united struggle. It's a shame and a crime that people should be able to unite behind the Palestinian cause, but that the Jewish cause should be limited to Jews and right now evangelical Christians. We need to broaden the base in support for our issues. And on that basis, 2 last things, and then we will finish on time. Not Jewish Standard Time, German Jewish Standard Time. Okay, 2 more things. One of the most important things for people to do, everyone here, it is shocking, shocking, shocking. 82% of American Jews have never been to Israel. 82% never been to Israel. Okay, this is a resolution. I'm sure everybody here has been to Israel many times, right? Probably not. But look, we have New Year's resolutions just like the secular New Year. It's a time to make pledges to do things differently. Go back to Israel, bring your friends, bring your Jewish friends, bring your non-Jewish friends. We just did 3 years in a row, we've done listener tours to Israel. We went with 200 people, about 60% Christians, 40% Jews. We had the most wonderful time and it was inspiring. Going to Israel, particularly now, is life-changing. It's life-changing. It's important. And something else that might be life-changing, into which you can also please invite your Christian, your secular, all your different friends. Coming up a little bit more than a month from tonight, October 23rd, after the holidays are behind us. October 23rd is a very special event. There is an outstanding speaker, tremendous speaker, right here in Bala-Cynwyd at Bala-Cynwyd Middle School. The program is on the 4 big lies about Israel and how to answer them. I'm going to be speaking at that occasion. And October 23rd, I hope to see everybody there. Bring everybody you know. It is sponsored by Chabad of the main line, but you certainly don't have to be Chabad or Jewish to participate. A very important and informative evening on how to win the propaganda war. You can go to chabadofthemainline.org. That was a shameless plug. May I wish everybody here, Gamar Hatima Tova, you should be inscribed for a good and a sweet and a successful year. Lashana Tova.